Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. It is Thursday, July 30th, 2015, and this is one of my favorite webinars because it is about a book that I think, that I say often is the most important book about child development that I've ever read. And when I say most important, it changed my life. But what makes it significant for me is I've talked to dozens of other professionals, therapists who say the same thing. And that's for me what makes it such a special book. So I'm going to get right into it and talk about some things that really I think are hard to talk about. Now, I love this quote because it speaks to us about our culture, our society, and the age that we live in. The history of childhood is a nightmare from which we have only recently begun to awaken. And we know from history that the way that women and children have been treated is essentially like property. And it's fairly recently in terms of recorded history where we're starting to understand and see our children as people, see them as subjects instead of just objects. And I think that that's significant as we start off a discussion of this book. So, the interesting thing for me is I read this book 20 years ago. I read it again last year for a webinar, and I could not believe how good it was. But I reread it again for this webinar, this version of the webinar, and I was like I had never read some of it. I could not believe how rich the writing, how rich the content was of Alice Miller's book. But as I prepared for this last time, and I've thought about this for years now, been reluctant to talk about this book and to recommend this book, I thought to myself, how can I present this book? Because it seems to trigger in parents so much guilt. It's coming from from the perspective of the child and talking about the trauma that children are exposed to. And some of the examples are quite extreme. But then what I realized as I was talking about it is if we can think about it from the perspective of our own childhood, right? If we can understand the legacy that we inherited and that we are likely to pass on if we don't reevaluate our own history, our own context, I think it can alleviate some of that idea about guilt. So, it's important that you understand your own wounds in this process, and that's really going to be the only thing that's going to put a stop or slow down this legacy that Dr. Miller talks about. Excuse me. If reading this book leads to guilt, it may be evidence of the primary need in childhood, that the need is to be fully seen and enjoyed rather than what was received, the praise for being good. And what I mean by that, let me read that again. If reading this book leads to guilt, it may be evidence of the primary need in childhood. That need is to be fully seen and enjoyed rather than what was received, as opposed to the praise for being good. And what I mean by that is, if your instinct, your reaction initially to reading this book is guilt, then I think it is evidence of this idea that you need to be good, that who you are is less than okay. Because really who we are is we're human, and we're people with our own wounds and our own struggles. And so I think even the idea that you might come away from this feeling guilty or be triggered by that is evidence of your own history, of your own childhood. Not all of it needs to be true. And there are some examples that are pretty extraordinary. She talks about at times, not just the subtle abuse and neglect that all of us were exposed to and all of us inadvertently expose our children to, but she talks about serious examples of abuse at times. And so, but there's still a lesson in that. There's still value in that. And it doesn't mean that everything has to be true. I remember after I read it last year and I was sharing with my therapist that I loved it again, I told her. And she's talking about it being one of the most important books in her, the formulative concept of her therapy. Part of what I said to her was, I don't agree with everything. There are a couple of things I don't agree with. And her response to me is, it doesn't all have to be true. And you or we might have noticed something or learned something in the 40 years since Alice Miller wrote this book. So I hope that frees you up to considering it. I hope it frees you up to being open to the idea and to letting it marinate. Like I said, be ready for the severity of examples if you launch into reading it yourself. And considering accountability without guilt, understanding your own sense of contingent love and worth. I think part of what I've learned to develop in my life is this idea that I can be accountable. I can see my impact on my children, and it doesn't come with guilt. In fact, probably because I can get rid of some of that guilt, I'm more able to look at the impact on my children, the things that I do to them, the way that I need them to be something for me, the way that I intimidate them with my anger and my loudness. Whereas 10 years ago, I couldn't see it as clearly as I do now, and as often as I do now. And I think that's because I've been able to get rid of a lot of that guilt in this process. Many people struggle all their lives from this oppressive feeling of guilt, the sense of not having lived up to their parents' expectations. This feeling is stronger than any intellectual insight they may have. It is not a child's task or duty to satisfy his parents' needs. No argument can overcome these guilt feelings, for they have their beginning in life's earliest period, and from that they derive their intensity and obduracy. They can be resolved only slowly with the help of revealing therapy. So that's where it comes from. It comes from our own childhood. That's how we were raised. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that before we got into some of that. To set some of the foundation, I want to talk about this. You might consider not reading this book at this time. If you're prone to guilt, if you still can't get out of the way of understanding your own humanness in this kind of chain in your family, then consider not reading it. But if you can read it from the perspective of the child, of you being a child, I think it'll be helpful. There is some advanced language and theory, so it's a slow read. Don't be in a hurry. It's only 116 pages, I believe, but it's not something that you're going to breeze through. Alice Miller's contribution to our awareness of child abuse and what we get and what we can learn about it in our own parenting. Giving your child the gift of letting them feel anything towards you without having to take care of you. I have always suggested that that's the greatest gift that we can give to our parents, is allowing them to not like us, to hate us, and really being okay with it. Not this disconnected, cut off punishment, abandonment that we sometimes give to our children when they show that to us, but understanding what it's like to be the little one and the one that can't escape, can't run away in this relationship. This is an invitation, I think, to do deeper work. Like I talk about with my book all the time, therapy and a book are not the same thing, but really an invitation, in this case, to do one's own work. To be able to say, I'm going to do some intensive work, or I'm going to do some therapy work, or I'm really going to get committed to my meetings. Most important as you approach this is not trying to be a good parent, but rather trying to be a whole person. Rather try to be able to look at your warts, your limitations. That's really what needs to be at the foundation when you launch into this book. And how to watch this webinar. There's going to be some text-heavy slides, some really dense material tonight. So if you're watching it live, go back and watch it again. If you're watching it recorded, press the pause button and take a moment to rewind and listen to it again. I'm going to read some text-heavy slides, but then I'm going to talk about it, translate it into our common everyday language in using examples. Also, you can request the slide. You can get the slides if you go to the parent portal, if you're a current parent, and you can click on download the PDF, and you can have these slides so you can look over some of them. Almost everything in this slide presentation is a quote from Dr. Miller. When we were children, this is how we were controlled. We were told to feel bad when we didn't live up to our parents' expectations. That's how they molded us, corrected us, and guided us. And we're tempted to use it in our own lives for the same purposes. But like I always teach, guilt isn't the solution to morality. Guilt isn't the solution to living a more fulfilling, healthy, spiritual, emotionally resilient life. It's not. It's the thing that causes us to shrink, to pull away, to look away from the parts of us that we think are bad, that we think are evidence of disappointing our parents or others in this process. When guilt overwhelms us, we must develop symptoms, neuroses, and even may rebel against it without regard for anything else. This is what I talk about in the shame cycle. This idea that if guilt becomes so intense, that we'll actually go the other way. We'll compensate with that pressure by actually be acting out more, by getting more away from our core, our authenticity, our center, or our morality. The idea of understanding dynamics without blame. Can you tolerate when your child says, this is what I don't like about you. This is how I think you're doing a bad job. And the way that looks is you can just listen. And you don't have to come back and say, you're blaming me or that's not how it was. That's evidence of you not tolerating it. Right? And you're going to miss the opportunity for connection. Miss the opportunity to contain your child, to provide a safe context for him or her. And I always say blame cuts both ways. So our pursuit of our childhood wounds may offer us a feeling of compassion towards previous generations as well as towards ourselves. So if we're the cause of everything with our children, then we're off the hook because it's really upon our parents. And then you can just take that back all the way through all the generations. So this isn't about pointing the finger. This isn't about punctuating it in terms of cause and effect. This is about understanding human beings and understanding the dance and understanding at times how even the subtlest of interactions can be harmful for children. Don't move to forgiveness too quickly. I think people who move to forgiveness immaturely, right, too quickly, oftentimes don't really take the opportunity to grieve. And I think we are at times encouraged to forgive really quickly, and then we develop what Alice Miller talks about as our depression. Because depression is evidence of unfelt emotions, right? Of an ungrieved process. So it's important that we go through the stages of anger and sadness and resentment and hurt before we move to forgiveness. And then, do you need to be seen as a good parent? Is that important to you? Especially in the person of your child. If you need your child to see you as a good parent, you're both in trouble. And even once removed from that, if we need others in society to see us as good parents, we're also in trouble. Because we're going to have a limited perspective, a limited view, limited vantage point with which to look into ourselves and see ourselves honestly. Experience has taught us, this is how she begins, that we have only one enduring weapon in our struggle against mental illness: the emotional discovery of the truth about the unique history of our childhood. We must try, in a long process, to discover our own personal truth, a truth that may cause pain before giving us a new sphere of freedom. If we choose instead to content ourselves with intellectual wisdom, we will remain in the sphere of illusion and self-deception. For me, the debate is over on this principle. I've been doing this long enough to know that this is a true principle. And it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're an experienced therapist, a successful mother or father by many standards, or an emerging young person into adulthood. That this is the key. And if we don't do this work, we're going to be, as she said, shackled by invisible chains, held hostage by the wounds of our childhood, as subtle as they might be. So it's important to know that this work is what liberates us, frees us up to act in a more connected way to ourselves and to others. Most people do exactly the opposite. Without realizing that the past is constantly determining their present actions, they avoid learning anything about their history. I have seen more parents unaware of how their issues from childhood are affecting their children. I was just talking to the group last night in Chicago, and I see some of you are on here, that last time when I was doing a group in Chicago, one father raised his hand and said, so I think what I hear you saying is that a lot of what gets into our way of parenting effectively is our own childhood. And I didn't intend this, but it was difficult not to laugh. My response was with a smile on my face, it's almost all about that, right? The blind spots, the triggers, right? The fears, the insecurities, the shame, the guilt, all comes from our childhood. And that doesn't have to come with hatred and vitriol and blame and finger pointing at our parents. It doesn't have to come with that. Just like it doesn't have to come when we look at ourselves pointed back at us. But that's where it comes from. That's where all of that stuff comes from. Our rage, all that stuff. Some assumptions that we have to believe, or that she asks us to believe as she launches into this idea in the book. The child has a primary need from the very beginning of her life to be regarded and respected as the person she really is at any given time. When we speak here of the person she really is at any given time, we mean emotions, sensations, and the expression from this first day onward. In an atmosphere of respect and tolerance for her feelings, the child in the phase of separation will be able to give up symbiosis with the mother and accomplish the steps toward individuation and autonomy. I'm going to mention the mother idea one time, and she makes this in her book. She's typically talking about the primary parent during the first 5 years. And historically, that has been mothers, although she acknowledges that fathers are taking more and more of that role in our society. But it's really functional parent, functional mother, but she usually uses the word mother. So The idea is that we buy into is that the child needs to be seen and heard, that everything she thinks and feels is valid from the earliest of ages, and that the mother can tolerate it, that the mother doesn't go into a panic, the mother doesn't become rigid, frustrated, angry, doesn't need the child to be good, to not cry, to not be upset, for the mother to feel okay. And in this atmosphere, when the separation process begins to occur, then it's also a safe place to do it. The mother allows for it, and the child can do it successfully. If they are to furnish these prerequisites for healthy development of their child, the parents themselves ought to have grown up in such an atmosphere. If they did, they'll be able to assure the child protection and well-being, the protection and well-being she needs to develop trust. Parents who did not experience this climate as children are themselves deprived throughout their lives. They will continue to look for what their own parents could not give them at the appropriate time, the presence of a person who is completely aware of them and takes them seriously. This search, of course, can never fully succeed since it relates to a situation that belongs irrevocably into the past, namely to the time right after birth during early childhood. And so much of what she suggests is that we're trying to resolve issues through our children in our present day that really are from our past. So we've got to go back there. We've got to see them. We've got to understand them. The fact that we need our children to respect us, to have that feeling of respect towards us, to like us, to admire us, to be devoted to us, and that when they're not those things, not do we set a boundary, not do we set a limit, but we actually get angry and depressed and panic, and we plead and we guilt and we coerce. And her claim is that's because the fact that we're asking our child to give us what our parents should have given us, right? That's where it should have come from. That's when we needed it. We needed it in childhood in the first 5 years. But because we can't get it, we're susceptible to look for it anywhere. And there's two categories of people that she says are most vulnerable and most likely for us to try to get it from. One, our children. They're captive. They can't go anywhere. We love the fact that they adore us early on, that they look at us, that they stare at us. The second group of people that we're most likely to exploit to get our needs met are the clients of the therapist, right? In the same way they're vulnerable, in the same way we're tempted to look for that attention, that admiration, and we're likely to put that feeling above taking care of them and meeting their needs. And they know that. They can feel that it's unsafe. They can feel that we need that from them. And that pressure is oppressive. A person with this unsatisfied and unconscious, because repressed, need will nevertheless be compelled to attempt its gratification through substitute means, as long as she ignores her repressed life history. The most effective objects for substitute gratification are a parent's own children. The newborn baby or small child is completely dependent on his parents, and since their caring is essential for his existence, he does all he can to avoid losing them. From the very first day onward, he will muster all the resources to this end, like a small plant that turns the sun in order to survive. So let me just spell it out this way. Because a child is so dependent and needs a parent so much, he'll do anything to get that love and attention, because the risk of that love and attention is that he'll die. And emotionally, it will feel like that. It'll feel like terror, like horror. So the child at early stages learns to give the parent that attention that they're seeking at the sacrifice of themselves, at the sacrifice of their own needs and their own development, their own feelings, their own sensations, their own beliefs. The relationship between parenting and our true self. What is missing above all is the framework within which the child could experience his feelings and emotions. Instead, he develops something the mother needs. And although this certainly saves his life by securing the mother's or father's love, at the time, it may nevertheless prevent him throughout his life from being himself. So the giftedness of the child, right? And to the extent that our own histories are unexplored, the gifted child will sacrifice self, will give over to parent, will be. And that's why so many teenagers become angry. They're trying to push away. And they're feeling resentful. And they're feeling smothered. Right? And they're feeling uncared for. And that goes back a few years even for them. The parents have found in their child's false self the confirmation they were looking for, a substitute for their own missing security. So the child learns to present from an early age what mom and dad need to see, feel, get in order for mom and dad to feel okay. So that mom and dad won't abandon them. So that mom and dad won't reject them. So that mom and dad won't rage at them. So that mom and dad won't become rigid. Right? That's the cycle. A child can never see through unconscious manipulation. It is like the air he breathes. He knows no other, and it appears to him to be the only breathable air. We don't know what's happening. We can't see this. It's not on the surface. It's something that, like she says, must be revealed through deep and long-term therapy. And here's something else. I believe, it is my belief about this way, this universe, this life, that is often what children are unconsciously pulling their parents into when they end up at our program. A place where they can begin to have a discussion and say, Mom, Dad, this wasn't okay. And yes, I was smaller than you, but you can't talk to me this way. And you know what? It's not my job to take care of you. It's your job to take care of you. And you've got to find another adult to do that for you. It's your job to love me. It's your job to provide that for me. It's your job to make me feel that I'm the most important thing in the world at a young age, that the whole world revolves around me. And that whatever I do, poop, fart, smile, laugh, cry, is amazing. That's the job of the parent with young children. When a 6-year-old mother died, this is an example that she gives. His aunt told him, "You must be brave, don't cry. Now go to your room and play nicely. I can be sad or happy whenever anything makes me sad or happy. I don't have to look cheerful for someone else, and I don't have to suppress my distress or anxiety to fit other people's needs. I can be angry and no one will die or get a headache because of it. I can cry when you hurt me without losing you. Today I question things that do not make sense to me." This is an example of a woman who's writing, and I've broken it up a little bit, where she's giving examples about the way we tell our children to be good, to be nice, to be quiet, and how we learn not to feel. We learn not to question things. And obviously, a lot of your teenagers and young adults are questioning things, right? And they are challenging things. That's part of them having this rebirth, discovering. That's why I always say the symptoms are evidence of anger, of wounds that need better expression, that need a safe place to be. For a mother can react empathically only to the extent that she has become free of her own childhood. When she denies the vicissitudes of her early life, she wears invisible chains. What the mother had once failed to find in her own mother, she was able to find in her child, someone at her disposal who could be used as an echo or a mirror or a reflection and could be controlled, who was completely centered on her, who would never desert her and offered her full attention and admiration. I'm just going to pause again to make the comment about the guilt piece, right? The possibility that this book, that this content could lead to a parent feeling guilty. Remember, as I said in the beginning, if you feel guilty for this, this is your childhood. This is your childhood, not just your child's childhood. And as scary as that might be, as loyal as you need to be to your parent to say that they're good parents, and we repress so much, right? We cover up these wounds with memories about vacations and laughter. And those things are true too. But this kind of stuff, what we're struggling with, our inability to listen to our children, our inability to contain them, all like I said, all of our triggers, that's evidence of stuff that we didn't get taken care of. If we were full, if we were content, if we were filled up, we could provide so much more for our children than often we're capable of doing. As I said before, the giftedness of the child is not super intelligence. The giftedness of the child is their capacity to read, to know what a parent needs, and to give that to them, even at the expense of themselves. Without therapy, it is impossible for the grandiose person to cut the tragic link between admiration and love. So we begin early on to mistake praise for love and connection, right? That's why I'm really careful about praise, right? I think it's okay to compliment a child. I think it's okay to point out to a child something they did well or something they stuck to for a long time. Those are okay. But be careful, because what happens when the child falls on their face? What happens when the child makes a dumb mistake? What is the suggestion? And do we then respond with distancing, with rejection, right? With frustration? And if we do that, we're starting to make a connection for the child in the child's mind and the child's psyche that admiration and love are the same thing, and they're not. So part of what we know is that those of us, and that's most of us, that grew up in this kind of context, that we oftentimes are drawn to become confidants and comforters and supporters and advisors, helpers with others, right? We see a lot of meaning. And I love what she says about therapists. Therapists, who else without this previous history would muster sufficient interest to spend the whole day trying to discover what is happening in the other people's unconscious? And I know that to be so true for therapists, right? That there is a certain empathic skill set that many of them have. And why? Because that was required of them. Because it was required of them to the point that if they didn't demonstrate it and utilize it, then they would have been rejected. So they've really developed the skill, right? It was needed in childhood, now it's serving them professionally. And that's why our work as therapists is to go back and figure it out so that we're not exploiting our clients the same way that we were exploited. The therapist may cloak his disapproval and derision behind abstract terms like borderline, obsessive, regression, destructive, but unless he explores the 3-year-old boy inside of himself, he will not see the parallel between these terms and garden variety contempt. And so again, especially, I see therapists whose clients are struggling. They're not being good clients. They're not making the necessary progress. They might even reject or become angry or disappointed in the therapist. And what is the therapist tempted to do? The same thing that parents are tempted to do, is to get cold. But since we have a large vocabulary to pull from, we don't just say sarcastic, rude, 4-letter words at our clients. We use big words like obsessive, regression, destructive, and borderline. That's the way that we express our derision toward the client who isn't giving us the attention and admiration that we need, that we didn't get in childhood. So this idea of this connection between depression and grandiosity, they're the same sides of they're the same other sides of the same coin. Right? Depression is an absence of feeling, a numbness. Depressed people don't eat. They don't even know when they're hungry. They block all sensations. And grandiosity is a defense against the depression even farther. So I cover up my listless, helpless, numb sense of myself with a sense of inflation. I need that admiration. Grandiosity is based on the concept of the false self parading itself around and accumulating praise as a counterfeit form of love. I don't know if all of you can relate to that, but I can definitely relate to that. I'm more aware on a day-to-day basis when I'm looking to be impressive so that I don't have to deal with the emptiness that I feel inside. Depression is the result of suppression, conscious denial, and repression, unconscious denial, right? We push it down. I don't want to feel this. I can't be angry. And some of that is conscious, and some of that is unconscious. And we do it to survive. We do it to maintain the attachment from our parents, because if they abandon us, literally, we could die. And if they abandon us, at least it will feel like the unspeakable terror. The lifting of depression comes through grief. When depression dissipates, vitality is restored with an ability to spontaneously feel one's emotions: rage, sadness, jealousy, happiness, hurt, frustration, joy, etc. I love that statement about how the way out of depression is to grieve. And then it leads to this sense of vitality where we can spontaneously feel all of our emotions and sensations. Our contempt for others in grandiose, successful people always included disrespect for their own true selves, right? The grandiose person doesn't like themselves. That's why they're constantly seeking praise, seeking attention, seeking admiration. Self-esteem is based on the authenticity of one's old feelings and not on the possession of certain qualities, right? It's not how smart you are, how fast you can jump, how good you look, how much money you make, how little you cry as a baby, how early you're potty trained, how self-sufficient you were as a child. How well you... That's not self-esteem. Self-esteem is the capacity to be authentic. Self-esteem comes from the connection that we had with healthy parents, that tells us that what we are is okay and enough. That's what self-esteem is. So, you know when people say you're being oversensitive or having irrational feelings? There's this shaming tone to that. Like, get over it. Something's wrong with you that you're feeling that way. But there's another angle to look at this. It is precisely their oversensitivity, shame, and self-reproach that form a continuous thread in their lives unless they learn to understand to what those feelings actually relate. The more unrealistic such feelings are, and the less they fit present reality, the more clearly they show and they are concerned with the unremembered situations from the past that are still yet to be discovered. If the feeling that begins to arise is not experienced but reasoned away, the discovery cannot take place, and depression will triumph. So you know how I use the phrase to follow the crumbs, right? The bread comes back home to find yourself. This is what I mean. Instead of trying not to feel it, understanding where it comes from. Why am I overreacting? Why am I overly sensitive? Why do I respond with nonsense? Why do I respond ridiculously uninsightfully at times? It's not shameful. It's not I'm going to kill myself for it. I'm going to kick myself in the butt for it. I'm going to beat myself up. There's something there I need to understand. There's something there that will lead me back to my childhood. There's something there that will lead me back to the recognition and the experience that my parents needed me to be something so that they could feel good about themselves. So like I always say, this is what we're trying to do in Wilderness, is teaching children how to feel. So how do we do at that as parents? It is remarkable how at the age of 2, such a child can be left alone to be good. She's giving an example of a child in an extreme situation that needed to not cry, to actually stay alive. These people have all developed the art of not experiencing feelings. For a child can experience her feelings only when there is somebody there who accepts her fully, understands her, and supports her. And you know what's difficult about this? As we grow up in adolescence and young adulthood and adulthood and older adulthood, this is impossible. You know, adults don't need unconditional love. If they do, we're in big trouble. But children did need it. And the fact that they didn't have it, the fact that their needs were a burden to us, the fact that when they cried, we were upset and frustrated, the fact that they got in the way of our agenda, all of those things left a mark, left a wound, and their job is to learn how to grieve it, to grieve it, to go back there and feel the pain, feel the loss. That's the job. And that's the healing. And that's the liberation. It's not just liberating for the child. It liberates the parent of that child. Because then the child doesn't need to hold on to a grudge and wait for the parent to come around. They can just see and connect to the parents later in adulthood. What do we need our children to be? However paradoxical this may seem, a child is at the mother's disposal. The mother can feel herself the center of attention, for a child's eyes follow her everywhere. A child cannot run away from her as her own mother once did. A child can be brought up so that it becomes what she wants it to be. That's powerful words, right? It's a powerful example. The child is a captive, right? And the really is at the parent's disposal in young childhood. So finding our true self, like I said before, we need to develop the capacity to mourn. We need to look at some things that we need to be disloyal to our parents, right? Ungrateful. All of those phrases that most of the parents that I work with think that to utter, to feel, to believe would make them immature, would make them spoiled brats, would make them ungrateful, right? But we need to become those things to be able to give us back our vitality. This is not a homecoming, she says, since this home has never before existed. It is the creation of a home. And that's what it feels like to me. That's what it's felt like to me in the past 30 years. Is this idea of finding a new home. Finding myself. And finding people or persons who can contain it somewhat. A therapist in my case. A wife who now can contain it as well as any spouse can. The child must adapt to ensure the illusion of love, care, and kindness, but the adult does not need this illusion to survive. Right? We can survive without it. We don't need it. We don't need somebody to caretake us. We can take care of ourselves. Probably the greatest of wounds, not to have been loved just as one truly was, cannot heal without the work of mourning. When we then realize that all our lives we have feared and struggled to ward off something that cannot really happen any longer. It has already happened at the very beginning of our lives while we were completely dependent. I think that's so powerful. We keep getting afraid of something that already happened early on. If it didn't happen, we wouldn't be afraid. If it didn't happen, we would carry around this internal copy that would be telling us we're okay already. And we don't need somebody else to tell us that. So, to the extent, and all of us are on this continuum, but to the extent we're still looking for that, we are not addressing the original injury, the original abandonment. I like to think about our children, the children that are acting out in some ways, as closer to figuring this out than we are. For many of us, with our children in the program. Disrespect is the weapon of the weak and a defense against one's own despised and unwanted feelings, which could trigger memories of one's repressed history. So, children that are full of rage, that are angry, right? That's just this vulnerable lashing out. And it can lead to them beginning to understand some of the wounds, some of the things that they didn't get from childhood. Recognizing that we have hurt our children painfully and injured their budding self, let them tell you that. That's why it's so important for you to listen, to not defend, to not excuse, to not justify, to not prove anything to them, right? That's all about your needs. That has nothing to do with the child's need. Your child does not need you to be good. They just need to be whatever they are, which at times is really disappointed in you, really frustrated in you, and really angry at you. So let them tell you that. Learn to listen and then expect it and invite it, ask for it, and know that it's okay. And it's going to be hard because we're asking them to take care of us, and we were wounded as children, so it's going to feel like a double wound. But when we can have the perspective, I think, as adults, that's upside down when we need them to be proud of us or like us or admire us or look up to us, when we can realize where that comes from, where the original wound happened and what they really need, it can give us some courage, some ability to allow for this to happen. We talked about this night in the meeting. Be careful of expressing being proud of your children for their accomplishments. This is similar to the chapter in the book Nurture Shock on praising the giftedness of the child and their accomplishments and the development of the false self. I mean, if you're proud of your child, then when they don't live up to it, are you disappointed in them? Right? And again, if that's true, that's so threatening to them. And like I said, a book is no substitute for a good therapist. Neither is it a substitute for an experience. But it is an invitation and can give you some courage. And this is where it concludes. If a child is lucky enough to grow up with a mirroring, available mother who is at the child's disposal, that is, a child's development, then healthy self-feeling can gradually develop in the growing child. Ideally, this mother should also provide the necessary emotional climate and understanding for the child's needs. But even a mother who is not especially warm-hearted can make this development possible if only she refrains from preventing it and allows the child to acquire from other people what she herself lacks. And I have this as the last slide because I think that's what we do when we send our children to programs. I think that's what we do when we walk into a therapist's office, either with our child or to drop our child off. Because we're allowing our child to get their needs met even if it's not through us. And like I say, when our students leave the program, many of them say they feel safe and more liberated than they ever have in their life. And that's with a high degree of structure. And most of the time when we hear someone say they feel safe and liberated, we don't equate that with structure. We equate that with something else. But the freedom that they're expressing, the ease that they're expressing, the liberation that they're expressing is, I don't need your children to like me. I don't need your children to think I'm good at what I do. I don't need your children to love me. They can be mad at me, hate me, and I'm okay. And I can listen. And it's much, much harder, like I always say with my own children. But I can do it, and so can my staff, much better than you can as a parent. That's most often the case. Because our esteem is dependent upon your children and their admiration. So You give them that safety. We give new tools. We give a vehicle, right? A platform, a way for this dialogue to begin to occur. You start to get strong as you work on these webinars, do these readings, get coached each week from your therapist. You start to learn to listen. Sometimes you learn the skill before it's really digested and internalized. And then your child starts to have the ability and a safe place to express it. And then the tension goes down. And then the vitality and the light goes up. That's what happens in this process. And that's what, in many ways, you're doing for your child. So, love the book. Recommend it to everybody if you can tolerate the guilt. Right? If you can steer away from getting lost in some of the early serious examples that she gives in the book and understand the principle of child development and the development of the false self versus the finding of the real self. But I'm happy to take any topic related questions. Then we'll go through some slides and I'll take questions on any topics. No questions at this point. I'll go back at the end. Please go to 6 of these meetings while your children are with us. If you haven't gone to 6 and your child has already graduated, please go. They will help you look at this stuff, help you see your stuff. Please follow us on social media. You can find about things that we won't be able to announce any other way. But sometimes it's the groups or the meetings or the activities or the speaking engagements or the wilderness play that's going to be coming out next year and touring the country that we're contributing to. You can get my book on Amazon. You can get an audio version there. You can use the link there on the Alumni Foundation page, and 10% of the proceeds go to helping people who can't afford treatment. So, next parent support groups, we have some on here. August 18th in LA. Talk to Jennifer Graham at 49jennifer@live.com. San Francisco, we don't have a date for that yet. I'm going to be in Washington, D.C. on August 27th at 7 to 9. I don't know the location yet, so if you want to RSVP to Stephanie at evoketherapy.com, and then when we find the location, we'll send it to you. And then we'll send out an announcement also. And then I'll be in New York City. This is a Sunday. Because of my schedule that week, I'm going to be there on a Sunday afternoon, and I thought I'd just try this, see how it works. Sunday, August 30th, 4 to 6 p.m. Also RSVP to Stephanie at evoketherapy.com. Don't know the location of that one for sure. Might not do the same location we've been doing. Upcoming Entrada workshop. This is for all parents that are presently with us. We would like all parents to go to this. It's an experiential education experience. That's kind of redundant. The Heroic Family Intensive. Even if your child is in the program, you can apply for this. If you need financial assistance, we're happy to help you with this one. August 21st through 24th, that's led by me. That is families, even siblings, if they are 13 or older, coming out to the field and doing some intense work. We have several already signed up for the Heroic Parenting in September, the 10th through the 13th, also hosted by me and the Evoke staff. And then Finding You for any individual, any topic, young adult on up, October 8th through 11th, an intensive, spiritual, mindful, doing some of the exploration of this stuff through some psychodramas and other activities. Pursuits Adventure Trip. If you want to know more about that, go to our website. We have these. We just had one that was 10 days for a family. So let us know if you're interested in that. All right. I'm happy to take any topic questions or any off-topic questions before I close up tonight. Still no questions, Stephanie? Nope. I hope you take the time to look at the book if you haven't yet. And like I said, you can request the slides. You can actually write to webinar at drbradreedy.com to request the slides also. If you're not a part of the parent portal. And then next Monday, we'll be doing a webinar on how wilderness therapy works. What is this intervention? What's the difference between this and outpatient therapy or residential treatment? what are the elements of it that make it so effective and so powerful. That'll be Monday, August 3rd at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Thanks for joining me. Hope this point of contact with help is helpful. Hope that this can inspire you to look in areas that maybe you haven't looked before, to read this book, and to start to consider the legacy that we are engaged in from previous generations on through us to the next generation. And hopefully that can come with healing. And I know there's that, like she says, that it oftentimes starts off with anger or rejection or a sense of disloyalty, which is also evidence that we need to feel that way instead of being open to it. So hopefully it will be an invitation that'll be received by many. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you Monday evening. Bye bye.